the graveyard of shadows. It was a chilly autumn evening when 5 friends, Sam, Lara, Amir, Sarah, and Danny, gathered for their usual Friday night hangout. They had heard rumors about an old graveyard at the edge of their town, deep in the woods. The place was infamous for strange occurrences, sudden disappearances, and eerie sounds in the dead of night. No one dared to go there. But the group, eager for some adventure, decided it would be a thrilling experience to explore the graveyard and see if the stories were true. Come on, what's the worst that could happen? Amir laughed as he and the others packed flashlights, snacks, and their phones. Sam, the skeptical one, wasn't so sure. Graveyards aren't just places of rest. They're places of power. We should be careful. As the sun began to set, they made their way to the old path that led to the graveyard. The trees grew denser, and the air felt heavier with every step they took. The wind howled through the trees, making eerie whistling sounds. Despite the uneasy feeling, they pushed forward, driven by their curiosity and the thrill of the unknown. When they reached the graveyard, it was unlike anything they had expected. The tombstones were old, cracked, and covered in moss, barely visible under the overgrown weeds. A thick fog lingered over the ground, swirling around their feet as they walked. There was a chilling silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves. "This place gives me the creeps," Lara whispered, her voice shaking slightly. Danny, trying to lighten the mood, laughed. "What did you expect? This is a graveyard, after all." Suddenly, Sarah noticed something strange. A grave at the far end of the cemetery looked freshly dug, the earth around it still loose and wet. "That's weird," she said, pointing. "Why is there a fresh grave here? No one's been buried in this place for decades." They approached the grave cautiously. As they stood around it, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble slightly. Amir, always the daring one, leaned closer to get a better look. Just as he did, a low growl echoed from deep within the earth, sending chills down their spines. "We should go, now," Sam urged, backing away. But before they could move, the ground beneath the fresh grave split open, revealing a dark, bottomless pit. From the depths emerged a shadowy figure, its form shifting and writhing like smoke, eyes glowing an unnatural red. The friends froze in terror. The figure let out a bone-chilling wail, and the fog around them thickened, turning into grasping, cold hands that pulled at their clothes and skin. "Run!" Lara screamed, snapping everyone out of their shock. They sprinted through the graveyard, the shadowy figure chasing after them, growing larger and more menacing with every second. The fog seemed to have a life of its own, twisting and trapping them in its grasp. The old gate at the entrance loomed ahead, but it felt like it was miles away. Amir tripped and fell, the shadow looming over him. Danny and Sam rushed to pull him up just in time, but not before the shadow reached out with its long, twisted fingers, grazing Amir's leg. A cold, burning sensation shot through his body, and he screamed in pain. With all their strength, they managed to drag Amir towards the gate. As they reached it, the fog began to thin, and the shadowy figure seemed to stop at the edge of the graveyard, unable to cross the threshold. It let out one final scream before retreating back into the grave, the ground sealing itself shut as if nothing had ever happened. Breathing heavily, the friends collapsed on the ground outside the graveyard, their hearts racing. Amir's leg was bruised and ice cold, but he was alive. "We need to leave," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and never come back." As they limped away from the graveyard, None of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched. The stories were true. The graveyard wasn't just a place for the dead. It was a place of darkness, where shadows had their own lives, and once you stepped into their world, they never let you go. That night, as they lay in their beds, each of them had the same nightmare. The shadowy figure, standing at the foot of their bed, whispering in a language they couldn't understand. Its red eyes burning into their souls, promising that one day they would return to the graveyard. And this time, they wouldn't leave. The next morning, the group gathered again at Lara's house, their faces pale from the lack of sleep. No one wanted to talk about the nightmares, but it was clear they had all experienced something terrible. Amir sat silently in the corner, wincing every time he moved his leg. "We need to figure out what that thing was," Sam said. "This can't just be a coincidence." "I agree," Sarah added. "But what are we going to do? Go back there?" The fear in her voice was obvious. No one wanted to return, but the pull of the graveyard felt stronger with every passing minute, as if it was calling to them. Amir, whose leg had started to show strange black marks, finally spoke. "We don't have a choice. That thing, it's not done with us." The friends reluctantly agreed to seek help. They went to the town's local historian, Mrs. Connolly, who had lived in the area for decades. When they mentioned the graveyard, her face turned ashen, and she immediately tried to dissuade them from going back. "You've unleashed something ancient," Mrs. Connolly whispered, her voice trembling. "That graveyard is cursed. Many have gone there seeking adventure, and few have returned the same." She told them the legend of the graveyard of shadows, a place where the restless souls of the damned gathered. The shadowy figure they saw was a shadow warden, an entity that guards the graves of those who died seeking vengeance or trapped by dark magic. Once a person steps foot into that graveyard, they are marked. "If you don't find a way to break the curse," Mrs. Connolly warned, "it will consume all of you." With time running out and Amir's condition worsening, the friends knew they had to return to the graveyard to confront the Shadow Warden and break the curse before it claimed them all.